Theo, look at me. It's Mama. I'm right here. Baby, please. Just look at me.
Count with me, Theo. Name one thing you can see. These episodes run their course. There's nothing to do but wait.
I'll pay anyone. Reach him and I write a check tonight. $750,000 to whoever reaches my son.
Papa, look at his hand. He's doing our thing.
This is a delicate clinical situation. Let the professionals handle it.
Step back, Dr. Price. Let him.
An hour. Nobody could reach him.
Nobody.
Picture a boy of 7 years old, folded down onto a cold marble floor, his knees drawn to his chest, his small hands pressed flat over his ears. Around him stands a ring of grown adults in expensive suits, and not one of them can reach him. His mother, one of the most powerful women in the city, is on her knees in a skirt worth more than most people earn in a month, begging him to look at her. He will not. He has not spoken a single word in public in 2 years. And then a man nobody in that building had ever looked at twice would set down his mop, cross the floor, kneel, and whisper one word that would change everything. But before you hear that word, you have to understand why no one else could get anywhere near this child. It was 6 o'clock in the evening at Meridian Tower, and the lobby was the kind of place built to make ordinary people feel small. 40 feet of glass, a fountain the size of a car set into polished stone, brass letters spelling the company name above a reception desk where 2 guards stood very straight. The workday was ending. People streamed toward the doors with their coats over their arms, and every one of them slowed when they reached the center of that echoing room, because the center of that room had stopped being an office lobby and become something else. It had become a place where a mother was losing. Her name was Vivian Cross, and she ran the whole building. That evening she had brought her son to meet her after a specialist appointment, and somewhere between the car and the elevator, the world had grown too loud for him. His name was Theo. He clutched a small backpack against his stomach, and looped through its zipper was a blue luggage tag, soft at the corners from being held. He rocked. He made no sound at all. Silence, in a child, can be louder than any scream, and everyone in that lobby had gone quiet listening to it. Vivian had money, and money summons help fast. Within the hour, she had pulled in the man her company kept on retainer, a child psychologist named Dr. Alan Price, who arrived with a leather folder and the calm certainty of a man who had never once doubted himself. He crouched near the boy, kept a careful distance, and began speaking in the flat, coaching voice of someone reading from a manual. "Count with me, Theo. Name one thing you can see. Squeeze your mother's hand twice if you hear me." The boy heard nothing that Dr. Price offered. Or perhaps he heard all of it, and none of it was what he needed. He pressed his hands tighter to his ears and turned his face toward the stone, and Dr. Price straightened up with a small, patient sigh, the sigh of a man building his excuse in advance. "These episodes have to run their course," he told Vivian. "There's really nothing to do but wait it out." And the mother nodded, because she did not know she was allowed to disagree with an expert. By now, a crowd had gathered, and a crowd is its own kind of pressure. Employees who should have gone home lingered at the edges, holding their phones low against their chests, the way people do when they are recording something they know they should not. You could see the small red lights blinking in the gloom. One young man tilted his screen to catch a better angle of the boy on the floor, and a woman beside him murmured that she should not, and then did not stop her. 2 women whispered near the elevators. A man in a delivery uniform stood frozen with a package under his arm. Nobody helped. Nobody left. They just watched a small boy come apart, and their watching made the air heavier, and the heavier it got, the smaller Theo folded himself, until he was hardly bigger than the backpack he held. At the far side of the lobby, past the fountain, a man in gray work clothes pushed a cleaning cart out of a service corridor and stopped. His name was Amos Reyes. He worked the night shift, emptying the bins and running the wide dust mop across that acre of marble after the important people went home. In 2 years at Meridian Tower, not one person in a suit had ever learned his name. He was part of the building, like the fountain and the brass letters, and he had arranged his life carefully so that this was true. He looked at the boy on the floor for a long moment, and something crossed his face, and then he looked away and reached for his mop. Near the wall behind him, a girl of 9 years old sat on an upturned crate with a library book open on her knees. This was his daughter, Nia. The after-school program had closed early, and there had been no one else, so she rode the bus downtown and did her homework in the corner of the loading dock while her father worked, and neither of them minded, because they had learned to be a family in the cracks of a hard schedule. She was not reading now. She was watching the boy, and her book had slid closed on one finger, and her small face had gone still and serious, in a way that made her look much older than 9. Before we go on, let me say one quiet thing, because this next part is why some of you are here. If stories about ordinary people and the moments that reveal who they really are mean something to you, stay with me to the end of this one. That is all I ask. Now, back to the lobby, where a man was trying very hard to disappear. Amos gripped the handle of his mop and told himself the thing he had been telling himself for 4 years. I am not that man anymore. Under his shirt, on a thin steel chain, hung a plain wedding ring that no longer fit his finger, and when he was frightened, his hand would rise on its own and press the ring flat against his sternum, as if to hold something in place. His hand did that now. He fixed floors. He did not fix people. He had tried that once, and he had lost everything. And a man does not walk twice into a fire that already took his whole life. Across the room, Dr. Price had decided the situation needed managing rather than solving, and managing meant reassuring the client. He murmured to Vivian about long-term therapy plans, about how public settings were simply too stimulating, about how expectations needed to be lowered. And Vivian, who had negotiated deals across 3 continents, felt something in her chest give way, because she understood suddenly that the smartest, most expensive man in the room was telling her to accept that her son would always be like this. She turned to the crowd, her voice cracking down the middle, and she said the only thing a desperate person with money knows how to say. I will pay, she said. Anyone. I don't care who you are. If you can calm him, if you can just reach him, I will write a check tonight. She named a number, and then, when no one moved, she named a bigger one. $750,000, she said, to whoever can reach my son. The number landed on the marble and rolled around the glass walls, and for one ugly second you could see it change people. You could see them do the math, and then look at the boy and realize they had no idea that money cannot buy a language you never learned to speak. 3 people tried anyway. A young executive knelt and offered the boy a candy from his pocket, speaking too loud and too bright, and Theo flinched so hard he cracked his elbow against the stone. A woman from the marketing floor crouched and sang the opening of a children's song in a wobbling voice, certain she had found the trick, and the boy turned his face away as if the sound were a hand raised to strike him. Then a security guard tried to simply lift him, arms out, and the boy came alive with a thin, terrible whine and scrambled backward until his spine hit the base of the fountain, and he could go no further. Each attempt made it worse. Each hand reaching in made his hands press harder to his ears. And the phones kept filming, the small red lights steady in the dark, and the $750,000 hung in the air, and it bought exactly nothing. Off to the side, half hidden behind Dr. Price, stood a woman with a clipboard held against her chest like a shield. Her name was Grace Okafor, and she worked under Price, assisting on his cases, carrying his folders, writing up his notes. She had watched every second of this. Twice she had opened her mouth. Twice she had closed it. Because she had learned across 3 years in his shadow that a junior does not contradict the man on retainer in front of the client. So she stood there, swallowing what she knew, and her knuckles went pale around the clipboard. Amos had not moved, but the smell had found him. There was no smoke in that lobby, and still he smelled it. The way you smell a thing your body will never let you forget. The 9th of January. The stairwell that filled with black. the weight in his arms and the weight he could not reach in time. He shut his eyes against the glass and the fountain, and his hand pressed the ring hard against the bone, and a boy was drowning in the middle of the floor, and everyone with a title had already given up. Then a small, warm hand slid into his. Nia had come off her crate without a sound, the way she always moved, and she was looking up at him, and she was looking at the boy, and her voice when it came was barely a breath. "Papa," she said. "He's doing our thing." Amos looked, and there it was. In the middle of all that flailing and folding, the boy had begun to do something with his right hand, over and over, without knowing he was doing it. 3 fingers tapped against the center of his chest, once, twice, then pressed flat and held. Tap, tap, press and hold. It was not in any book. It was not in any manual. It was the smallest, most private thing in the world, and Amos knew it in his bones, because for 2 silent years after the fire, a little girl who had stopped speaking had used exactly that to tell her father the only thing she could still say. It meant, "I am still in here." It meant, "Come find me." Amos could not breathe. Nia squeezed his hand once, and she did not beg, and she did not pull. She only stood beside him and waited, the way she had waited for him to find her 1,000 times, and let her small, steady wait be the thing that answered the war inside him. He looked down at his daughter, at the girl he had learned to hear when she had no voice, and he understood that hiding from that boy would be its own kind of leaving. And he had promised himself, kneeling by another small bed years ago, that he was done leaving. He let go of the mop. It fell against the cart with a clatter that turned every head in the lobby. And then Amos Reyes, the janitor whose name no one knew, began to walk toward the center of the room. Dr. Price stepped into his path before he had gone 10 feet. The psychologist put up a flat, polite hand and looked Amos over. The gray uniform, the work gloves stuffed in a pocket, and his mouth curved into something that was almost kind, and was not kind at all. "This is a delicate clinical situation," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep back and let the professionals handle it." He said the word professionals gently, the way you set a heavy thing down on someone. But Vivian had seen her son's hand tapping, tapping, pressing flat, and she had seen the janitor's face change when he saw it. And a drowning person does not care who throws the rope. "Let him," she said. Her voice cut across the marble like a blade. "Dr. Price, step back, let him." And there was such raw command in it that the expert stepped back, and the crowd went silent, and the whole enormous room seemed to lean in toward one small boy, and the man walking slowly across the floor to meet him. Amos did not hurry. He knew, the way you only know from having done the hardest thing there is, that speed was the enemy. 5 feet away he slowed. 3 feet away he stopped, and he did not loom, and he did not reach. He lowered himself down, not standing over the boy, but folding to the floor beside him. And he laid one bare palm flat against the cold marble, close enough that Theo could see it, far enough that it asked nothing. He knelt there in his gray work clothes with his hand on the stone, and said not one single word. Theo's eyes flicked to him and away, quick as a bird. Amos did not chase the look. He let his own hand rise to his chest, and he tapped 3 fingers against his sternum, once, twice, then pressed flat and held, right over the ring beneath his shirt. He gave the boy's own sign back to him, quietly, without fuss, the way you answer a knock on a door in the dark, to let the person outside know that someone is home. He held his palm there and waited. The boy went very still. For the first time in an hour, his hands came down a little from his ears. He stared at this stranger who was speaking his secret language back to him, and his own hand crept up and made the sign again, faster now, asking, checking, "Is it really you? Do you really understand?" And Amos answered it again, slow and sure, and something in the child's rigid shoulders loosened by a single degree. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a guard found the switch, and the fountain died. The pump wound down from its steady roar to a trickle, and then to nothing, and the great room fell into a hush, so complete you could hear the boy breathing, quick and shallow. Into that hush, Amos leaned forward a few inches, close to the boy but not touching, and he opened his mouth, and he whispered one single word, "Here," he said. "Just that. Here." The boy blinked, his breath caught, and held, and let go slower than before. He looked at the man's face, really looked, and the awful trapped terror that had been driving him for an hour began, by tiny fractions, to drain out of his small body. He unfolded, just slightly. His hands slid the rest of the way down from his ears and settled in his lap around the backpack with the soft blue luggage tag. He did not smile. But he was there, and he had let someone else be there with him. And in that lobby full of powerful strangers, it was the most astonishing thing anyone had ever seen. Dr. Price made a short sound through his nose. "Coincidence," he said, loud enough to be heard, straightening his cuffs. "Children cycle out of these states on their own." He simply timed it. The word dropped into the quiet room, small and mean, and a few heads turned to it, unsure. But Amos did not turn. Amos was looking only at the boy, and the boy was looking only at Amos. And between them, the private thing went on happening. Amos tapped his chest again, gently, and waited. And Theo, watching him, lifted 3 fingers and gave the sign back. Once, twice, pressed flat and held, and then he reached that hand out through the empty air and pressed it, flat and warm, against the back of Amos's hand where it rested on the cold floor. The whole crowd drew one breath at once. The boy who had not touched a stranger in 2 years had reached out and chosen to be found. Dr. Price opened his mouth to speak again, and this time nothing came. He looked around the ring of faces for a single ally, for one person willing to nod along with him, and he found that no one in that lobby would meet his eyes. He had told this mother to lower her hopes. He had told her to wait it out, and a man with a mop had knelt down and proved him wrong on his own retained ground, in front of 40 witnesses, in the space of a few breaths. His hand rose to his cuff and stopped there, and the silence he stood in was louder than anything he could have said. Amos ignored him completely. He did not argue, did not glance up, did not spend a single ounce of himself defending anything. He simply stayed in the rhythm the boy had given him, tapping and answering. And slowly, slowly, Theo edged closer along the floor until his shoulder rested against the arm of this quiet stranger who had turned out to be safe. Vivian pressed both hands to her mouth. Her eyes were streaming, and she did not wipe them. And then it was Grace Okafor who moved. She set her clipboard down on the reception desk, and the small, flat sound of it seemed to steady her, and she stepped out from behind Dr. Price into the open floor. When she spoke, her voice shook at first, and then found its feet. "It is not noise," she said. "I have watched this man do something none of us could do, and I will not stand here and let it be called an accident." Dr. Price turned on her, and she did not stop. 3 years, Grace said. "I have carried your bags and written your notes and stayed quiet. Not tonight." She turned to the room, and to Vivian, and finally to Amos, and what she said next, she said carefully. "The way you handle something breakable. I know who this man is," she said. "When Mrs. Cross's office ran security clearance for the building, I processed the files. I recognized his name the moment he set down his mop." Amos went rigid, his hand stilled on the floor. He looked up at her for the first time, and there was a plea in it, a mute request, to please, please, leave it buried. Grace's eyes filled, but she held his gaze, because she had decided that the truth was owed to him more than the silence was. "Your wife's name was Elena," Grace said quietly. "There was a fire in an apartment building on the 9th of January, 4 years ago. You went back up the stairs twice. You carried your daughter out. You could not reach your wife. And afterward, your little girl did not speak, not one word, for 2 years. And you did not send her away to specialists. You sat on the floor with her, night after night, and you taught yourself to hear everything she could not say. You learned to read silence," she said, "because it was the last language your family had left." The lobby did not make a sound. Amos knelt there on the marble with a stranger's child leaning warm against his arm, and the careful gray life he had built came apart at the seams in front of everyone. He had spent 4 years being no one, being the man with the mop, and a young woman with a clipboard had just spoken his whole heart out loud into 40 feet of glass. His hand rose without his willing it, and pressed the ring flat against his chest, the same place, the same gesture he had answered the boy with, because it was all the same gesture. It always had been. And because Grace had spoken it aloud, the room went with him, back into the thing he never told. He remembered the blue dark of a rented room in the months after the fire, and a small girl sitting up in the bed with her chin on her knees, awake at 3 in the morning, her eyes open and dry and far away. He remembered how the doctors had wanted to give her a word, a diagnosis, a program, a plan, and how none of it had made her make a sound. And he remembered the night he gave up on all of it and simply lay down on the floor beside her low bed so their faces were level, and stopped asking her to come up into his world and started waiting to be let into hers. He had lain there night after night, saying nothing, breathing slow, until the smallest thing had happened. One night her hand had come out from under the blanket and tapped her own chest, once, twice, and pressed flat, and he had not understood it. And he had lain very still and tapped his own chest back the exact same way, just to show her he had seen, and she had done it again. And that had been the beginning of the only conversation that mattered, a language of two, built by a father and a daughter on the floor in the dark, that meant nothing to anyone else in the world, and meant everything to them. I am still in here. Come find me. I am here. He remembered, too, the first sound she made after 2 years of that silence. A single cracked syllable, his name, thin and rusty as an old hinge, and how he had turned his face into the blanket and wept without a sound so as not to frighten it back down into her. Everything he had done tonight, every slow inch across that lobby, he had learned in that room, from that girl, in that grief. He had not brought a technique across the floor. He had brought the only thing the fire had left him that was worth anything. Dr. Price stood alone in the middle of all of it with his leather folder, and there was nothing left to say, because a diagnosis is not the same thing as understanding, and everyone in the room now knew the difference. Grace had not destroyed him. She had simply told the truth, and the truth had done the rest, quietly, the way water finds the crack in the stone. Theo, meanwhile, had discovered the cuff of Amos's sleeve and taken hold of it in one fist, the way small children hold on to the safe adult in a crowded place, and he was not letting go. Amos looked down at that little hand curled in the gray fabric and felt something in his chest that he had kept locked for 4 years, and he did not fight it. He simply covered the boy's hand with his own and let it be held. Vivian Cross came the rest of the way down onto her knees, there on the marble in her expensive skirt, so that she was at her son's level for the first time all evening. And Theo, feeling her come near, did not flinch. He looked at her, then at Amos, and Amos gave the smallest nod, and the boy lifted 3 fingers and made the sign, and turned that small held hand toward his mother. Vivian did not understand it, but she understood that her son was offering her something, and she pressed her own hand flat to her chest and gave it back to him as best she could, and her son watched her do it, and did not look away. "Show me," Vivian whispered. She was not speaking to the boy. She was speaking to Amos, and her whole empire and her whole fortune were in that small broken word. "Show me how you did that. Show me how to talk to my own child." Amos took her hand, this woman who owned the building, and he guided it gently through the rhythm. Tap, tap, press and hold, and he spoke low, only to her. "You don't fix him," he said. "You go where he is. You let him see you're not going anywhere." That's all it ever was. Dr. Price gathered the pieces of himself and murmured something about follow-up sessions and treatment frameworks, and it came out thin, and no one answered him. Grace turned and looked at him, and this time she did not need to say anything at all. He closed his folder against his chest and walked toward the doors, and the crowd parted for him without warmth, and the great glass doors sighed shut behind him, and that was the end of the smartest man in the room. Amos rose slowly to his feet, his knees stiff from the cold stone, and Nia crossed the floor to him and pressed herself against his side, and he put his arm around his daughter and held her while the whole lobby watched. He was not embarrassed now. Something in him had set down a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten it was a choice. Theo stood too, gripping his backpack with the blue tag, and stayed close to Amos's leg, and near the fountain, a woman began, softly, to clap. and then the whole room was doing it, and the sound rolled up the glass like rain. And then Theo, looking up at his mother in the middle of all that noise, opened his mouth, and in a voice rusty and small from 2 years of disuse, he said one word, "Mama." Just that. Vivian pressed her son against her with a sound she could not hold back, and buried her face in his hair, and rocked him, and this time he let himself be held. When she could speak again, Vivian stood, still holding Theo's hand, and she looked at Amos with wet, shining, overwhelmed eyes. "The offer," she said, $750,000. It's yours. I meant it. Nobody has ever earned it the way you just did." She was already reaching for the phone in her pocket, ready to make it real, ready to solve the last of it the only way her world knew how. Amos looked at his daughter, and at the boy, and at the money hanging in the air, and he was quiet for a moment, choosing his words in front of Naya, the way he chose everything in front of Naya, because she was watching, and because what she saw him do would become part of who she was. Then, he shook his head, once, gently. "No, ma'am," he said. "I didn't come across that floor for a check. I came because your boy asked, and I knew how to answer. You don't pay a man for that. You'd break the thing that made it worth doing." But he did not simply refuse it and walk away. He stepped closer, and his voice dropped, and it was steadier than it had been all night. "If you want to spend it on the ones nobody kneels for. There are children all over this city who go quiet after the worst day of their lives, and there are fathers and mothers sitting on the floor in the dark right now with no idea how to reach them. Put it there." He paused, and his hand found the ring beneath his shirt, and put a name on it, he said. "Her name was Elena. She'd have liked that better than anything I could buy." Vivian Cross, who had built a fortune saying yes and no to enormous numbers, stood in the middle of her own lobby and wept openly in front of her employees, and then she nodded, and she gave him her word, and it was the easiest promise she had ever made. There would be a fund. It would carry the name Elena, and it would put people like Amos into rooms with children like Theo, quietly, for years, long after that evening was forgotten by everyone who had filmed it on their phones. Then Vivian turned and found Grace Okafor at the edge of the crowd, still standing where she had finally chosen to speak. "You," Vivian said. "You knew. You saw it. And when it mattered, you were the only one in this room with the courage to say so out loud. Dr. Price's contract with this company is finished tonight. His work will need someone with judgment and a spine to oversee it. And I am looking at her." She said it plainly, in front of everyone, so that there could be no mistaking it. Grace Okafor pressed her clipboard to her chest and, for the first time all evening, let herself smile. Amos crouched down to his daughter's level, the way he always did, and Naya looked at him with the boy's calm now settled into her own face. "Papa," she said, "when I grow up, I want to learn how to do what you did. I want to be the one who talks to the kids who can't talk yet." He looked at her for a long moment, this girl who had once had no words at all and now had that one, and he brushed her hair back and told her that she already knew how, that she'd known how since she was 6, that she'd taught him half of it herself. And Nia took his hand, and they went to fetch the mop. Because that was the truth of Amos Reyes. The clapping faded, and the crowd remembered their coats, and the powerful people went home to tell the story. And Amos put his hands back on his cart and finished his shift. He ran the wide dust mop across that acre of marble in the emptying lobby, and Nia rode the front of the cart the way she liked to, and the fountain came back on, and the ordinary evening closed over the extraordinary one, and he wanted it that way. A man like that does not need the room to keep watching. He only ever needed the one small pair of eyes that already saw him true. Months later, they say, a boy of 7 walked back into that lobby holding his mother's hand, and when he passed the fountain, he lifted 3 fingers and tapped his chest, once, twice, pressed flat and held, toward the far corner where a man in gray was emptying a bin. And the man set down the bin and answered it, and the boy grinned all the way to the elevator. The fund with Elena's name on it had opened its first 3 centers by then. Grace ran them. There was a photograph of a woman on the wall of each one, and under it, only her name. But the part they tell the longest, The part that outlived the money and the headlines and the offer of $750,000 was the smallest part of all. It was the way a man who had every reason to stay invisible knelt down on a cold marble floor and gave a frightened stranger's child the one thing no fortune can purchase, and did it without raising his voice, and asked for nothing, and let his own daughter watch every second of it. That was the whole of him. That was pure class. The kind that never once announces itself. The kind you only recognize when it kneels. Because in the end, that boy did not need to be fixed, and Amos did not need to be paid. A child only needed one person to climb down to where he was, and stay. That is what it means to truly see someone. And a little girl on a crate in the corner, watching her father, learned it forever. These stories are made with love, and this one was made for you. If it stayed with you, if it reminded you what it looks like when an ordinary person turns out to be the biggest heart in the room, subscribe and stay for the next one. That is all I ask.